This lesson will cover Chapter 13 on urban patterns, focusing on Key Issue 2. We'll be looking at where people are distributed in urban areas. First, we'll look at models of urban structure. Then we will see how the models apply in North America, then in Europe. Pre-modern cities in developing countries. We'll apply the models in developing countries, and looking at changes of urban structure of Mexico City. People are not distributed randomly within urban areas. They concentrate in particular neighborhoods depending on their social characteristics. Geographers describe where people with particular characteristics are likely to live within an urban area, and they offer explanations for why these patterns occur. Three models have been developed to explain patterns in cities. These models include the concentric zone model, the sector model, and the multiple nuclei model. The first model, the concentric zone model, has different areas associated with it. You can look at the key associated with this model to find out what each zone specializes in. If you look at region A, according to this model, a city grows in a series of rings that surround the CBD. One is the central business district, the innermost ring, where non-residential activities are concentrated. Zone 2 is the zone in transition. Industry and poorer quality housing exists here. Immigrants to the city first live in this zone in a small dwelling. They are also frequently created by subdividing larger houses into apartments. When you look at Zone 3 represents the zone of working class homes. There are also modest older homes that are occupied by stable working class families. Zone 4 is the zone of better residencies. These are newer and more spacious houses for middle class families. Zone 5 is known as the commuter zone. Beyond the continuous built-up area of the city is where this lies, and it's where people live in small communities and commute to work in the central business district. This model, shown in Figure 13-12 that you can find on page 466 of your textbook, is modeled after the city of Philadelphia. You can see in the second image, image B, that this is the zone of working class homes in Philadelphia. Next, let's take a look at the sector model. In the sector model, we can find that on Figure 13-13, also located on the same page. This model shows the city developing with wedges or corridors radiating from the CBD. We can see this demonstrated in Chicago's strip of high-class residential housing. You can look at the key to indicate the different zones or sectors of this model. You've got the central business district, similar to what it looked like in the concentric zone model, but then you have different sectors of corridors. For number 2, you have transportation and industry. For 3, low-class residential. 4, middle-class residential. And 5, high-class residential. Lastly, for our third model, this is known as the multiple nuclei model. Take a look at Figure 13-14. It's also located on page 467 of your textbook. This model displays different activities in different nodes. Like Harvard Square, serving as a center of services for students in Cambridge, near Boston. According to this model, a city consists of a collection of individual nodes or centers around which different types of people and activities cluster. As you can see in the key, the different nodes represent the different activities. The central business district is located in 1. Wholesale light manufacturing is located in node 2. Low-class residential is node 3. Medium-class residential is node 4. High-class residential is node 5. Heavy manufacturing is in node 6. The outlying business district is going to be in 7. The residential suburb is going to be 8. And the industrial suburb is going to be 9. All of these models can help us better understand spatial association. The models don't perfectly align with cities, but they can help us make sense of why cities look the way that they do and why different groups of people based in their social characteristics are separated into different regions. Sometimes the city's patterns may also be reflected in all 3 of these models, meaning that a city isn't necessarily exclusive to one. Let's recap the models one more time. The first one is the concentric zone model, and it was created in 1923 by sociologist E.W. Burgess. According to this model, a city grows in a series of rings that surround the central business district. The second model was the sector model that was developed in 1939 by an economist known as Homer Hoyt. In this model, a city develops in a series of sectors. Sometimes the sectors can be referred to as wedges or corridors, but they all surround still the central business district. And then lastly, the multiple nuclei model. That was developed by 2 geographers, C.D. Harris and E.L. Ullman in 1945. In this model, a city is a complex structure that includes more than one center around which activities revolve. Examples of these nodes include a port, a neighborhood, a business center, a university, an airport, and a park. This theory states that some activities are attracted to particular nodes where others try to avoid them. For example, a university node may attract well-educated residents, pizzerias, and bookstores, whereas an airport may attract hotels and warehouses. On the other hand, incompatible land use activities avoid clustering in the same locations. For example, heavy industry and high-income housing, for example, are rarely existent in the same neighborhood. The nodes of consumer and business services around the Beltway are called edge cities. Edge cities originated as suburban residences for people who worked in the central city, and then shopping malls were built near them to accommodate the incomes of people who lived there. Now, edge cities also contain business services, so rather than being reliant on the central business district, they may serve as their own region with their own nodes. This could imply never needing any reason to leave the node because everything necessary is existent within that particular region. Now we can start to apply the models. Take a look at figure 13-5 located on page 468 of your textbook. Looking at the key, we can examine the age of housing in Houston. This reveals the concentric pattern. In this case, the outer ring has a higher percentage of newer housing. If you consider 2 families with the same income and ethnic background, one family may live in a newly constructed home, whereas the others live in an older home. The family in the newer house is much more likely to live in an outer ring, and the family in the older house in an inner ring. Still looking at the city of Houston, we can look at a different figure. Figure 13-16 examines the median income and reveals a sector pattern. Given the 2 families who own their homes, the family with the higher income won't live in the same sector of the city as the family with the lower income. A sector to the west and the northwest here has the highest income households. Figure 13-17 examines the distribution of ethnicities in Houston, and in this case, this reveals the multiple nuclei model. People with the same ethnic or racial background are likely to live near each other. The key will indicate where African American or Black neighborhoods reside. Hispanic neighborhoods reside, and white neighborhoods. As mentioned before, the understanding of why cities are spaced the way that they are and why we can see patterns is because we can see overlays in these models. Looking at figure 13-18, we can compare rings and sectors in Houston. In image A, we see that a house is in an outer ring, but also a high-income sector. For B, this house is in the same ring as A, but in a different sector. C is a house that is in the same sector as the house shown in A, but in an inner ring. Europe's central business districts have a different mix of land uses than in North America. Differences stem from the medieval origins in many of Europe's central business districts. European cities display a legacy of low-rise structures and narrow streets built as long ago as medieval times. More people live in Europe's CBDs than they do in North America. And the most prominent structures in Europe's CBDs are often public and semi-public services, like churches or former royal palaces that are situated on the most important public squares. Also, Europe's CBDs are less likely to be housed in skyscrapers than in North America. Some European cities also try to preserve their historic CBDs by limiting high-rise buildings. Rents are a lot higher in the center of European cities than they are in US cities. Take a look at figure 13-19. We see a street market in Paris, and we see that the higher number of wealthy residents happen to live near the CBD, more so than we might see in the CBD or near the CBD in North America. Figure 13-20 shows that, like many other European cities, Paris does not have many skyscrapers. The one that you see in this photo was so unpopular when it was built that no others were allowed. Applying each of the models, figure 13-21 shows the concentric zone applied to Paris. The oldest housing is in the inner ring. When applying the sector model, we see that the southwest is the highest income sector and the northeast is the lowest income sector. In figure 13-23, we can compare rings and sectors in Paris. A has housing in an outer ring and a higher income sector. B has housing in the same ring as A, but in a different sector. And C has housing in the same sector, but in an inner ring. Figure 13-24 shows the multiple nuclei model. And immigrant neighborhoods, as you can see in Paris, follow the multiple nuclei model. The highest percentage of immigrants in the node are in northern suburbs. Let's recap the models again, comparing the US and Europe. As in US urban areas, the newer housing in the Paris region is in outer rings and the older housing is closer to the center. Unlike the US urban areas, though, much of the newer suburban housing is in high-rise apartments rather than single-family homes. Looking at the sector model, we see both in the United States and in European cities that people, particularly wealthy, higher income people, cluster in a sector. In the United States, where we're looking at high income housing, in Europe, we might see people more clustered in royal areas or former royal areas. When applying the multiple nuclei model, European urban areas, including Paris, have experienced a large increase in immigration from other regions of the world. In contrast to US urban areas, most ethnic and racial minorities reside in suburbs. This is the end of Chapter 13, Key Issue 2, Part 1, and we will continue with Part 2, looking at the history and how the models can be applied in developing countries in the next lesson.